We talked about yesterday, we talked about how the URL leads to a certain controller, which leads to a certain method in that controller, which meaning a block of code that fires in there. Oh, and by the way, for anyone worried about this, that geez, what if I don't want my page to have to start with the name of the controller followed by the name of the method, the block of code in the controller to fire out. You don't have to. I'll show you later in a different demo how you have total control over the URLs. I mean total. There's custom URL routing that you can make any URL lead to any controller and any method in there. But that's another video, another demo. So for now, let's just focus on the default case where we do want the URL segment after the domain to specify the specific controller, and the following segment to specify the specific method within that controller. Alright, so just bear with me. Okay, so what if, we talked about yesterday how this works and earlier in this video, and now we're going to just give you a small example of how you could dictate which content appears in your final pages. Because it was all pre-written, so it may have been a little confusing to watch me go over it, but let's just do an example. Say we have a lot of JavaScripts that do all kinds of important fancy things, but we don't need them the same on every page. Like say on every page of the site, there's some default JavaScript, okay? So for example, if we go to our view file, like for example on this page where we are now, or this page or whichever, it's loading this view Apple Z's end user eat.dna, okay? And so in this view file, this JavaScript is hardwired in, and this JavaScript is hardwired in because it's typed here, okay? So those are going to load for every page that uses this view file. But what if we wanted to have some of the pages in our site that use this view file load these as usual, but then some other special JavaScript? While other pages in the site that also use this same view file still load this same JavaScripts, but then load different ones, different JavaScripts. Okay, so then what we might do, just a total example, is we just take a variable called load more JavaScripts, and we put it right here. I'm just making this not commented out. There. Okay, so now we've got a container, a text variable, which is ready to go to receive custom dynamic JavaScripts in this HTML source code. And we could write, a bunch of, conditionals, if something, then something, look up a database and go figure out if this value of this field is blah, 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 then load this JavaScript. But that's crazy. If we clutter up this view file with a bunch of logic, we're defeating the purpose of the separation of MVC, the code logic from the presentation code. So you don't want to do that. You want to keep these views really clean so it just looks like HTML primarily, with an occasional lone container if necessary. All right, this stuff over here, I'll explain that in a minute. This is one exception I've made, and I'll explain that, and you'll get to love that probably, even though it looks ugly at the moment. But for now, we're going to focus on this JavaScript container. All right, so we've got that there. We reload our view, our page, and there it is. All right, oops. So I go look at the source code. See, here's the head section of the HTML, the default JavaScript, and then our container for any custom ones. Okay, there it is. That's why it's appearing up here. Okay. So how do we populate this with dynamic JavaScripts? Well, just remember all the logic goes in your controllers. So this page, now let's do it this way. Let's say that the food ones just use the default, but let's say the employment section of the website, which uses the human resources controller, say it needs some custom JavaScript. All right. So we're going to go to, so we're going to focus on this one. The human resources controller and employment method. So I go to my human resources controller, and I go to the employment method, which is this entire function from here all the way down to here, right? This whole big block. And we've got a switch case in here, which starts here, and it says, what's the value of controller param1? And these controller param variables are all the URL segments that come after the method. So that means this and this and this. These would all come in. This would come in as control param1, control param2, control param3, like that. All right, but in this case, employment, when you just click this link, there isn't any of those. So what that means is this switch case is going to not fire one of these cases, but it's going to come down to the default case right here, which means there's nothing in that control param1. Okay, so in here we've got this unordered list, which is loading these, basically navigation menu options, telling the user, well, excuse me, now that you're in the employment, what do you want to do in here, right? That's what this is. So anyway, we want to load the more JavaScript container. And you know what? I've got it down here in this default case. But instead of here, let's just put it. I'll clean that up later. Let's put it in this entire method. Anything in employment, anything at all in employment. Okay. We're going to load the more JavaScript variable with, again, that funny code that I haven't explained yet. Ignore that for now. And this, JavaScript. Okay, it's a new JavaScript that's in the usual place where we keep JavaScripts, in the web root JavaScript folder. And then here's the name, test for demo 1-employment. So now that's what should go into this container, which you recall is right here. Let's see what happens. We are inside, this is an alert, a JavaScript alert. We're inside this file. It worked, see? Up here, that load JavaScript is gone. Looking at the source code, the HTML, I mean, source HTML, here it is. Boom. We go look at that JavaScript here, and all it is this, a JavaScript alert. We're inside, the thing I just showed you. So that's why this pops up. Good, so it worked. So then let's say in store locator, which is the info controller, this one, in the store locator method, we want to load another JavaScript and say it's the JavaScript that goes and does something with Google Maps and helps the people find the different stores, so near them in their zip code or whatever. So anyway, let's go find that. Appleseas info, store locator. Here's the end of the store locator method function. Good, it's a nice short one. Yep, and I got it all ready to go. Here's our load more JavaScript variable. Paste. And now we're loading, this time, a different JavaScript. Appleseas test for demo 2, store locator, which is just this code. Another alert that says we are inside test for demo 2, store locator JavaScript. Reload, sure enough, it works. Look at the source HTML for that. Here it is. Okay, we just have one problem. I mean, this works great. Employment loads that JavaScript, Store locator loads that JavaScript. But what about the other controller methods, like the page, controller page view, blah, 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 that loads when we hit recipes here, this link. See, it's loading that controller and that method, which doesn't populate our JavaScript variable. So we have to initialize this to blank, to something, whatever we want, another JavaScript if we want, or just nothing in case there's no special JavaScript that should go in here for this page. So let's see. One way to do that, I mean, there's lots of ways you can do it. The temptation from the old school, the old way, would be to say, oh, I'm in the wrong website. That's why. Sorry about this. Anyway, here we are. The old habit would be, geez, if this is not initialized, then let's hide it, like, hide if this hide if this is raw, hide if this variable is equal to raw, meaning uninitialized, then don't show this. All right. Oops, I didn't save it. There. See? Then it works. Employment still loads its special one, but then these other ones, they don't do it. They don't try to load that. But that's dumb because then we're sticking too much logic in our view. I mean, pretty soon this will all be cluttered up again, and then what's the point of having all these separate files from the controllers to the views? So we want to leave this like that. I just did undo, undo, undo. We want to leave this nice and simple. So that means we've got to initialize this variable in controllers so that it starts out as blank, so that this will spit out nothing right there. And then it will load a special JavaScript when and where it's needed. So what we want to do is we want to load this variable at the start of the controller so that any method, it won't matter, it'll start out as blank. All right, and I've already got it right here. So I saw this coming. So here's our controller for human resources, okay? And at the top of the file, we have initialization stuff. That's why I've got this block that says start init, end init. And in between, we initialize things like, toggle switches. We'll talk about this later. Utilities that we might be using. Like there's a form validation utilities. I need to talk about that stuff later, utilities. And then down here is just a space for variables. So I've got one right here. There. So load more JavaScript is initialized to blank, and that's going to be the default value for this entire controller unless we set it to something else. Like we do here in this, employment method that loads that. Oh, I just did this in human resources. Okay, now I'm going to go to my other controllers, like the food one. We're at the top again, the initialization area. So for the entire food controller, there, we initialized it to blank, and for the human resources is done, information, these are the only 3 controllers used so far by this site. There. Okay, so load more JavaScript is initialized to blank in all 3 controllers. So now, our view is clean. You can see here, it's nice and clean. And wherever we go, we're not seeing this uninitialized JavaScript variable. Oops, I showed you one where it did have it. Let's go to menu where it doesn't have it. See? This is the default JavaScript that's in the view. But then after that, like right here, at this point in the code is where it would spit out that variable. And it does spit it out, but it's blank, it's nothing, in the cases where we haven't loaded it with something special. So this wraps up this demo. Do play with it, get good at it. You'll find that if you haven't been doing so already, that the more you get used to doing all your logic in the controller, separate from your presentation in your views, that your coding style will become more clean and your code will become more maintainable